is what Vladimir Putin had been told by the Russian aviation authorities. This flight had not come into Russian airspace yet. And the implication of that is that Vladimir Putin was saying to Barack Obama, this wasn't us. Of course, that is not going to convince many people. It's not going to convince the Ukrainians. It's not really going to convince the government of the United States either, because both of those organizations, both of those governments have been accusing Russia of supplying the pro-Russian separatists in the east of Ukraine with weaponry. They've been accusing them of supplying sophisticated weaponry, and it is possibly the sophisticated weaponry of that type that might have brought down this plane. We're hearing of a Boots missile system, a fairly sophisticated, albeit quite old missile system, guided missiles, surface-to-air, that would be the sort of thing that could have shot down an aviation flight.
Okay, Rory, we'll leave it there for now. Let's now go to Al Jazeera's Stephanie Cowan, who's at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. She joins us live. Stephanie, tell us about what's happening at the airport. It looked very quiet there just a few minutes ago before we came to you.
Yes, it is very quiet. Obviously, it's gone 1 o'clock in the morning here, so most flights have left for the night, and it will remain quiet. We're in the departures lounge. Obviously, until the morning, early flights start here about 6, 7 o'clock. So this is the quietest time of the year, of the day. But I think news is starting to filter through to the local staff that this plane has gone down with the loss of obviously 295 people. So there is a little bit of shock, and news crews are starting to arrive. Obviously to report on what's happened. This is obviously a huge shock coming on the back of the disappearance of the other Malaysian Airlines plane a few months ago. The Prime Minister, Najib Razak, has said he is very shocked by the news of the disappearance of this plane, and he is launching an immediate investigation. We did actually speak briefly to the Transport Minister, who had been in Beijing, speaking to his counterpart there about the disappearance of the Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. And he's now flying back urgently to KL to coordinate Malaysia's response to this shooting down, or apparent shooting down, of this plane over Ukraine.
We've just read a statement from Boeing, Stephanie. Boeing has issued the following statement saying, our thoughts and prayers are with those on board the Malaysia Airlines airplane lost over Ukrainian airspace, as well as their families and loved ones. Boeing says it stands ready to provide whatever assistance is requested by the authorities. Again, the first statement from Boeing after this Malaysia Airlines plane, a Boeing 777 crashed in eastern Ukraine with 295 people on board. Stephanie Cowan is at Kuala Lumpur International Airport for us. Stephanie, as we've been saying, and as you said before, this of course is a huge shock for Malaysia and Malaysia Airlines as a company. Just a few months after flight MH17, another Malaysia Airlines plane disappeared en route to Beijing with 270 people on board.
Yes, I mean, it is a huge shock. I'm sorry, we're now getting a public address announcement, so you may not hear me very well. But obviously, yes, it is a big shock for the airline financially. Obviously, following, as this is the second plane they have lost in a matter of months. The airline itself is going through dire financial straits at the moment. It has consistently lost money over the last few years, and the airline is considering its financial future and actually how long it can stay in business.
I was just going to allow Stephanie perhaps to hear what the announcement there at the airport is saying, but maybe she hasn't had a chance to hear it. Stephanie, just tell us about the reaction from Malaysia Airlines. Remind us of what they've said so far. They haven't confirmed, actually, that the passengers on board this plane have presumably died. All they're saying for now is that they've lost contact with flight MH17.
Yes, that's right. That is the only statement we've had so far from Malaysian Airlines. As I said, it is now in the middle of the night here in KL, so I'm not sure how much more we're going to get from Malaysian Airlines overnight, but I think there will be a rapid upturn in their actions come the morning. They've learned a lot of lessons following the disappearance of the earlier flight in March, so they will be keen, I'm sure, to make sure they don't make the same mistakes PR-wise as they did with the disappearance of MH17.
Okay, Stephanie Scowen at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. Stephanie, for the moment, thank you very much. Of course, we'll be going back to you as soon as there's any more information from Malaysia and Malaysia Airlines on this plane, flight MH17, that went down in eastern Ukraine with 295 people on board. This was a Boeing 777, and Ukrainian Interior Ministry officials are saying that the plane was downed by a ground-to-air missile. Earlier, we spoke to Pavel Falkenhauer, who's a military analyst, and he says it'll be extremely difficult to find who was responsible for this.
The plane was apparently, it was flying over a war zone, basically, where there's continuous fighting between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed rebels in the Donbass. There have been planes taken down and helicopters by the rebels before that, and recently there was a plane taken down. It was a transport plane, Antonov 26, which was flying rather high, which may mean that, at least that's what Ukrainians said, that the rebels have acquired not only shoulder launch anti-aircraft missiles, but more serious missiles that can shoot down planes flying on high flight 6, maybe even 10. Apparently here it was 10 kilometers. Of course, I believe both sides, all sides in the conflict will say that they have no responsibility, and it would be rather hard to establish who actually shot the missile. Though maybe if there are NATO AVAX planes flying over Poland and Romania, maybe they saw something. Such missiles, they create a hail of shrapnel that kills a lot of people on board before it actually hits the ground. So survivors would be most likely impossible to find. This is if it was a book, maybe it was some kind of other missile. Right now, I believe it's too early to jump to conclusions, but these missiles can hit at planes flying at high altitude and at low altitude. These are regular missiles, radar guided. Maybe there was Ukrainian military air activity at the time, and if there was a crew firing that missile, they could actually make a mistake, and the missile self-guidance system could take on a bigger target. If the military target disappeared, it took on civilian target. Such things basically happen sometimes. That's why planes should not fly over war zones. Of course, all sides will be denying responsibility.
Now we are getting the first moving pictures from the scene of the crash. These are the latest pictures that were uploaded onto YouTube. As you can see, lots of black smoke over the sky there of eastern Ukraine. Also debris from the sky, as you can see, falling down from the sky debris there. We can't see debris from the plane on these pictures, but we saw some earlier pictures that showed the fuselage of what is believed to be Malaysia flight MH17 that went down in eastern Ukraine, not far from the border with Russia, with 295 people on board. Again, these are the first moving pictures we're getting from the scene of the crash. As you can imagine, this incident is generating a huge response on social media. Let's cross over to Julie MacDonald in London for more on that. Julie.
Folly, thank you. Well, people all over the world are understandably desperate to find out what has happened, and they're sharing a lot of information online. I've been following these feeds along with my colleague Phil Lavelle, who joins me in the studio. Hi there, Phil. We've been paying a lot of attention, particularly to Twitter, which is often where we turn to in moments like this. Let's talk first of all about the Malaysian Airlines. What have they been saying on Twitter?
Well, they first commented on this 2 hours ago. Now, just to give you an idea of how quickly this kind of news spreads, this was retweeted 58,000 times within the first hour. Malaysian Airlines said that Malaysia Airlines has lost contact of MH17 from Amsterdam. The last known position was over Ukrainian airspace. More details to follow. Shortly followed by an official statement which they posted on Facebook. Malaysia Airlines confirms it received notification from Ukrainian air traffic control that it had lost contact with flight MH17 at 14:15 GMT, 30 kilometers from Tamak waypoint, approximately 50 kilometers from the Russia-Ukraine border. Flight MH17 operated on a Boeing 777, departed Amsterdam at 12:15 p.m. local time. It was estimated to arrive in Kuala Lumpur International Airport 6:10 a.m. Malaysian local time the following day. There were 280 passengers, 15 crew on board. More details to follow. They've since updated that statement. Not much more information, just saying that, reiterating what they said earlier. But we've also heard from the Malaysian Prime Minister. Very short statement from the Malaysian Prime Minister. Simply says, let me find it. I am shocked by reports that an MH plane has crashed. We are launching an immediate investigation.
And of course, there's been reaction from politicians. What have we heard? I know that we've heard about Putin perhaps being the first to tell Obama that this had happened, although our correspondent Patsy Culhane in the White House didn't think that was likely. What does Twitter say?
Well, that is what you're getting from Twitter. If you look at the Kremlin website, you look at Vladimir Putin's, if you look at the Kremlin Twitter account, Vladimir Putin's Twitter account, Barack Obama's Twitter account, there is no mention of this yet. What there is a statement that has been translated from the Kremlin website, which says, Vladimir Putin has expressed his deepest condolences to the Prime Minister of Malaysia with regard to the accident in Ukrainian territory of a Malaysian Airlines passenger aircraft, resulting in numerous casualties. The Russian head of state asked him to convey his sincerest words of sympathy and support to families and friends of the victims. Like I say, everywhere we're hearing that Vladimir Putin said directly to Barack Obama, told him directly what had happened in that telephone call. Some other comments. This is interesting. John McCain, the man who ran against Barack Obama for president in his first term, he's not been quoted directly on Twitter, but there is a lot of re-quoting from him when he was appearing on television in the US, in which he has said, if this is a result of a missile, this really should demand our attention to bring this thing to a halt, i.e. Ukraine. Reaction of the European community and the US has been insulting in how little help we have given.
It's interesting, isn't it, that Obama is carrying on with his diary today as usual. I think he's fundraising in Manhattan, and apparently he's going to continue doing that. So obviously for them, they're being cautious right now. They don't see this as being an emergency. Of course, it's a developing story. On Twitter, Phil, the other thing that strikes me is that it's often the comments about the human cost that speak loudest, and of course some of the pictures on Twitter which we won't broadcast. But what kind of picture can we form about the crash site?
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It looks like you would expect it. It's a terrible, terrible situation. There are lots of pictures here. There were some that were reported earlier which seem to have been taken down, which were photographs that appeared to show passports, probably of passengers, considering where they were found. The pictures I'm looking at now, you can see lots of smoke rising from the ground. You can see a lot of wreckage. It covers a huge, huge site. Some of it seems to be taken from TV footage. Other looks like amateur photography. There's a picture here that I'm looking at right now, which it's not a very pleasant thing to look at all. It is a body. It is a body and two seats that appear to have fallen to the ground. There is a picture of another body. That is everywhere you look. That is all you see: bodies and charred wreckage. There are what appears to be part of the fuselage. There are some wheels here on the ground. There is another picture which says it's unconfirmed, but it looks very much like a Malaysian Airlines plane with somebody standing on what looks like a fuselage.
The fuselage.
Yeah, on the ground. Just incidentally, looking at Barack Obama's Twitter account again, I'm just refreshing it. Still no mention here of what has happened. Let me just check. If you bear with me, I'll just check Vladimir Putin's again.
I'm also interested, Phil, on the pro-Russian separatists. I mean, they have a Twitter account, and I noticed that there was a thread that originally suggested they had taken responsibility, but are now denying that they tweeted that, but somebody has helpfully taken a screenshot of the earlier tweet. So they seem to be going round in circles.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of information appearing on Twitter and Facebook, and then a lot of information disappearing from Twitter and Facebook not long afterwards. You know, people are putting a lot of stuff on here, and as you can imagine, as I said, 58,000 times that first tweet from Malaysian Airlines was tweeted. So you can imagine how much stuff is coming in. I mean, if you hit refresh, it tells you that 20 tweets have appeared in the last few seconds. A lot of it is retweeting, people tweeting TV networks like Al Jazeera, people tweeting what Malaysia Airlines have said. But there is a lot to filter through, and a lot of stuff appearing and then all of a sudden not being there
Because
anymore.
of course it's a developing story. Twitter, these are unconfirmed reports, so we don't want anybody to take these things as rote. Phil, I'm just going to move on and talk about some of the speculation that there's been about what could have brought this plane down. In fact, an advisor to Ukraine's Interior Ministry says the Malaysian Airlines passenger jet was potentially brought down by a Russian-made Buk surface-to-air missile system. Now, each Buk system holds 4 missiles and is mounted on top of a vehicle, so it can be moved quickly. It's a large piece of hardware. It uses a radar to find a target, and once the missile is fired, it can reach targets as high as 30 kilometers. Now, that's 3 times the cruise altitude for commercial airliners. Each missile carries a 70-kilogram explosive tip, which detonates when an onboard radar determines it as close to the target as possible. Now, the warhead is designed to fragment, showering the thin skin of aircraft target with shrapnel. Phil, it's interesting, isn't it, that we're hearing about this Buk system. And of course, one of the big questions on Twitter that's being asked at the moment, well, there's several, let's sum them up. Why was the plane flying over the area that it was flying over? Because of course it's a conflict zone. Why wasn't it diverted? And what sort of missile was fired and by whom? Because Twitter's quite a good way to get an idea of the big questions everybody wants answered.
Well, you asked about the flight path. As I understand it from what I'm reading on Twitter, it was following the flight path that flight followed whenever it went on that route. Malaysian sources say that it was flying at an altitude of 43,000 feet towards Ukraine. One other thing just popped up here, Julie. Let me just point this out to you. This appears to be a photograph of a Federal Aviation Authority rule which was passed in April, which banned US carriers from flying over parts of Ukraine. Let me just quote, it says here: "Political and military tensions between Ukraine and the Russian Federation remain high. Compliance with air traffic control instructions issued by the authorities of one country could result in a civil aircraft being misidentified as a threat and intercepted or otherwise engaged by air defense forces of the other country." Obviously, we're still waiting to hear what happened here, but this alludes to some of the theories that this plane was shot down.
Phil, thank you very much for your analysis. And I notice here that Lufthansa has also asked their planes to avoid the area now also.
They've not officially said that yet, but there is a lot of word on Twitter that, yeah, Lufthansa are going to avoid that route for the time being.
Great. Thanks very much, Phil, for that update. We'll head back now to Folly in Doha. That's your update of what's being said about this incident on social media. Over to you, Folly.
Julie, thank you very much. And Julie, just let's remind our viewers of this developing story that we've been covering for the last 2 hours or so here on Al Jazeera. Here's what we know about the Malaysia Airlines plane that was reportedly shot down with almost 300 people on board. MH17 code-share flight with Dutch airline KLM left Amsterdam Schiphol Airport at midday local time, destined for Kuala Lumpur. Now, Malaysia Airlines says it lost contact with the Boeing 777 while it was in Ukrainian airspace. It crashed near the village of Grabovo, which is about 50 kilometers from Ukraine's border with Russia. Now, Ukrainian officials claim the plane was shot down by a Russian Buk missile, a claim refuted by Russian officials. Earlier, I spoke to Andrew Brooks, who's an aerospace analyst and the director of aviation matters. He says the key to who shot this plane down is the altitude it was flying and the missiles in the area available to reach that height.
Well, you see, an airliner is very vulnerable. I mean, it's like it has no defensive aids. It's not designed to get out of trouble. It sits there sedately going along. The question has to be asked: who fired? If this is the missile, forget this is not a fighter that's gone in and shot it down. This is a missile that's been launched, and only 2 people in the area have that sophisticated capability: the Ukrainians and the Russians. The Ukrainians are hardly likely to shoot down anything over their own territory, especially one that's palpably obvious coming out of Amsterdam. So the question has to be asked: why have the Russians, sophisticated power that they be, decided to shoot down an airliner?
Well, we don't know that yet because the Russians are denying any involvement in shooting down this airliner. Of course,
but nobody else can get up that high. So nobody else can get up that high apart from the Ukrainian military. This isn't a toy that's given to sort of goons and terrorists. It's far too sophisticated for them. Only a professional military force can operate this particular surface-to-air missile. And there's only two in town that could have done it, the Ukrainians and the Russians. Okay. Now, whoever of them did it, one has to wonder why they would have done it.
Obviously, a lot of unanswered questions at this time after news that a Malaysia Airlines plane with 295 people on board has crashed. Officials in Ukraine saying that the plane was shot down by a surface-to-air missile. This information obviously not confirmed right now. But these are the pictures, the latest pictures we're getting, stills of the plane as it was leaving Amsterdam Schiphol Airport around midday earlier today. It was en route to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, Malaysia Airlines flight MH17. The Malaysia Airlines authorities say the plane went down while it was in Ukrainian airspace, and they lost contact with the plane when it was in Ukrainian airspace. They are not confirming at this time whether the passengers on board the plane, 295 people, 270 passengers and 15 crew members have perished in this crash. But the reports that we've been getting from witnesses on the ground near the village of Grabavo is that there are at least 100 bodies on the scene of the crash. A lot of charred bodies. Reports say there are pictures that are circulating right now on social media of bodies from that plane crash, pictures that we choose not to show you here on Al Jazeera. Now, earlier I spoke to Pavel Falkenhauer, who's a military analyst. He says it'll be extremely difficult to find out who was responsible for this.
The plane was it was flying over a war zone, basically, where there's continuous fighting between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed rebels in the Donbass. There have been planes taken down and helicopters by the rebels before that, and recently there was a plane taken down. It was a transport plane, Antonov 26, which was flying rather high, which may mean that, at least that's what the Ukrainians said, that the rebels have acquired not only shoulder launch anti-aircraft missiles, but more serious missiles that can shoot down planes flying on high flight 6, maybe even 10. Apparently here it was 10 kilometers. Of course, I believe both sides, all sides in the conflict will say that they have no responsibility, and it would be rather hard to establish who actually shot the missile. Though maybe if there are NATO AWACS planes flying over Poland and Romania, maybe they saw something. Such missiles, they create a hail of a shrapnel that kills a lot of people on board before it actually hits the ground. So survivors would be most likely impossible to find. This is if it was a book, maybe it was some kind of other missile. Right now, I believe it's too early to jump to conclusions, but these missiles can hit at planes flying at high altitude and at low altitude. These are regular missiles, radar guided. Maybe there was Ukrainian military air activity at the time, and if there was a crew firing that missile, they could actually make a mistake, and the missile self-guidance system could take on a bigger target. If the military target disappeared, it took on civilian targets. Such things basically happen sometimes. That's why planes should not fly over war zones. Of course, all sides will be denying responsibility.
Now, Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko has issued a statement following this crash. The president has initiated the establishment of the State Commission with involvement of experts from ICAO and other international structures to investigate the tragedy with a plane of Malaysia Airlines Boeing 777. Rory Challens is in Moscow for us. Rory, we have the reaction there of the Ukrainian president. What's the reaction from Moscow?
Well, I just want to pick up on something that Pavel Felgenhauer was talking about in the clip that you played there. He was saying, sort of why were planes flying over a war zone? It seems that there were plenty of civil aviation flights over eastern Ukraine. MH17 was just one of them. That is because, although there has been a no-fly zone put in place by the Ukrainian government for a few weeks now, I think, in eastern Ukraine, it only extended up to a certain altitude, and flights like MH17, Boeing 777s, when they're at cruising altitude, are up sort of 10 kilometers in the sky, and that was considered way above any kind of risk zone, and that was why this no-fly zone didn't extend that far high, and that was why civil aviation has been going over eastern Ukraine uninterrupted for weeks. So, as long as the conflict has been going on there, civil aviation has been flying over the top of it. Of course, now that might change, and we're hearing from the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian authorities are considering completely barring civilian aircraft in the airspace over the zone of military operation in the east because of this crash. So I think we will see in the coming hours some sort of measure brought in along those lines. And in fact, we have already seen aviation voluntarily diverting from that airspace, deciding that this is something that is an area that they just don't want to get into anymore. That's including Russian airlines. Transaero is avoiding it, and so are other Russian airlines too.
Rory, both the Ukrainian government and the separatist rebels have denied shooting down this plane in the region close to the Russian border. Just remind us of what's been happening in that area recently. Pro-Russian separatists are, of course, believed to have shot down 2 Ukrainian military planes over this region in recent days.
Yeah, it seems that pro-Russian separatists have been getting increasingly good at shooting Ukrainian jets out of the sky. They have shot down at least one Sukhoi 25. They've shot down transport planes as well. They've been boasting of such conquests on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, or those sorts of forums. They've been quite proud of the fact that they have, in the last few days, and maybe a bit longer than that, going back a week or two as well, started getting increasingly skilled at downing Ukrainian aircraft. That has been a boon for them because recently Ukrainian military air superiority has been coming to bear very hard on the separatists and been exerting some quite serious casualties, quite serious losses amongst the separatist ranks. So there have been people within the Ukrainian government who've been looking at the kind of successes that the separatists have been having against their aircraft recently and saying, look, a ragtag bunch of amateurs can't be doing this by themselves. They have to be having some help somewhere. And where's that help coming from? Of course, the Ukrainian government says that help is coming from Russia. The Russian-Ukrainian border is long and it's porous, and things can flow backwards and forwards across it quite easily. That's why it's been of such importance to the Ukrainian military to get round behind the rebels and try and shut down that border. I've been down to the border in the last week, and I've seen what it's like. I've seen how easy it is for things to get across it. I saw a warehouse full of supplies, not military supplies, not weaponry, but things like medicine, things like food and push chairs and nappies and things like that. Some of that was going towards the refugee camps that are actually on the Russian side of the border. Some of it was going towards civilians on the Ukrainian side of the border, but some of it was also, and this is what I was being told by the people who were doing the smuggling, some of it was going towards the fighters themselves. So it is feasible, of course, that other things are going across, much more deadly things like weaponry, possibly even missile systems.
Right. All right, for the moment, thank you very much. Let's cross over now to our diplomatic editor, James Space, in London. James, there's been quite a lot of international reaction in the last hour or so about this plane crash.
Folly, let's just remind us where we are. If this had been the loss of a plane with 295 souls aboard in a plane crash, there would have been international reaction and a great deal of mourning across the world. But of course, this looks like it's a plane that has been shot down at a time of crisis already between Russia and the West. So real geopolitical dimension to all of this. We expect that many world leaders are taking stock of the situation, trying to find out information of exactly what happened, and there probably are only a few intelligence agencies and authorities that will be able to pinpoint exactly where the missile was fired from. The Ukrainians may have radar that shows some details, and then you have the spy satellites. Probably the US and Russia really are the only ones that would have the technology, I'm told by military experts, potentially to say who was responsible for this. But certainly I know that leaders are planning their reaction. We've had some reaction from the State Department, some reaction from other parts of Washington DC. We're hearing from our colleagues at the United Nations, where I normally work, there is talk now, early talk, of an emergency UN Security Council meeting to happen in the coming hours. Expect, if that happens, also to look to Brussels, see what the EU decides to do, whether they have any sort of emergency meeting, and also in Brussels to NATO, the North Atlantic Council, the ambassadors of NATO, who then will decide what to do there. NATO already has stepped up its efforts in Eastern Europe because of the crisis in Ukraine, because of the annexation of Crimea and the ongoing tensions in that area.
Right, James, you talk about a geopolitical dimension to this tragedy. We have heard of a phone conversation between Barack Obama and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. What sort of implications, what sort of repercussions do you expect to see diplomatically after this?
Well, we've had quite a detailed readout of that phone conversation between the two men, and we're getting details from our team in Moscow and our team in Washington. It seems to have been a long call. It seems that most of the call was about the sanctions that were put in place. It was President Putin, we hear, who initiated the call to President Obama, who asked for this call just a few hours after the US imposed new sanctions, and also after the EU imposed new sanctions. I think one interesting small point to mention is among those new sanctions was sanctions on a military firm called Almaz Anti. I may have pronounced that wrong, so apologies if I have, but that's a Russian military manufacturer. They are, I'm told, the current manufacturer of the Buk missile system, which many military experts believe may have fired the missile down the plane.
Okay, James, thank you very much for the moment. We'll leave it there. James Space, our diplomatic editor. Let's now check in with Al Jazeera's Stephanie Cowan, who's at the international airport in Kuala Lumpur, where that plane, Malaysia Flight MH17, was destined to. Stephanie, when we spoke just a while back, I mean, it was very quiet. It's still very quiet. I imagine it's coming up to 2 a.m. in Kuala Lumpur. Just remind us of what Malaysian authorities and airport authorities have said so far about this tragedy.
Well, they have they've only really confirmed that they lost contact with the plane, but I think it is confirmed, obviously, that the plane has been lost. The Malaysian Prime Minister has said he's very shocked by the news and is launching an immediate investigation. We have been told that the CEO of Malaysian Airlines, Ahmed Johari, is coming to the airport to give a press conference in the next hour or so, and obviously we'll keep you up to date with that. We're not obviously quite sure what he will say. Malaysian Airlines, I think, is very conscious of the fact that this is the second disaster in a matter of months to affect them. And the loss of the first plane, the MH17, on its way to Beijing in March was handled so very, very badly that they will be acutely conscious that they need to handle this one very sensitively, especially in the light of, as you were talking about, the diplomatic repercussions that have been going on.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Stephanie. Stephanie's Cowan live for us at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. As you can imagine, this incident is generating a huge response on social media. For more on that, let's cross over to Julie McDonald in our London News Centre. Julie.
Folly, thank you. Well, as you said, people all over the world are understandably desperate to find out what's happened, and they're sharing lots of information and speculation, of course, on Twitter and Facebook and so on. I've been following these feeds along with my colleague Phil Lavelle, who joins me now in the studio. Hi there, Phil. So we spoke a little earlier about what the airlines are saying vis-a-vis whether they're flying over Ukrainian territory. What's being said on Twitter?
You know, this is really interesting in itself, because bearing in mind how many people get their news from Twitter, how much this has been spreading on Twitter since it first happened a few hours ago. A lot of the airlines are not putting their information directly on Twitter, but they're putting statements out elsewhere. For example, Lufthansa's Twitter account still has no mention of this, yet they have released an official statement elsewhere in which they say, up to now, there has been no closure of Ukrainian airspace. However, Lufthansa has decided to fly a wide detour around East Ukrainian airspace with immediate effect. The safety of our passengers is our top priority. A total of 4 flights are affected today. Presently, no restrictions apply to the Lufthansa destinations Kiev and Odessa. KLM, although not yet officially confirmed by Malaysian Airlines, it is with great regret that KLM has learned about the possible incident with flight MH17, codeshare KL4103 of Malaysia Airlines from Amsterdam to KL. We are in contact with Malaysia Airlines to obtain further information. As a precautionary measure, KLM avoids flying over the concerned territory. KLM has published the currently available emergency number of Malaysian Airlines. What else? We've got the Department for Transport here in the UK. Flights already airborne are being routed around the area by air traffic control in the region. Pilots around the world have been advised to plan routes that avoid the area by Eurocontrol, the European Organisation for the Safety of Air Navigation.
Let's reflect on what's been happening politically. Obviously, the international community are cautious right now because we don't know what's actually happened here, but we've had some sort of a statement from David Cameron and also the State Department saying that they're not really sure what's going on.
Well, no one, it seems, is sure what's going on. The State Department appear to have said we're not sure what's going on, but if you look at their Twitter account, there's no mention of it on there. Again, Barack Obama, again with Vladimir Putin, the Kremlin Twitter accounts, there is still nothing there. The Kremlin, or Vladimir Putin, has released a statement via the Kremlin website. Translated, it reads, Vladimir Putin has expressed his deepest condolences to Prime Minister of Malaysia with regards to the accident in Ukrainian territory of a Malaysian Airlines passenger aircraft, resulting in numerous casualties. The Russian head of state asked him to convey his sincerest words of sympathy and support to families and friends of the victims. The the Malaysian Prime Minister has said, I am shocked by reports that a Malaysian Airlines plane has crashed. We are launching an immediate investigation. Of course, this plane was travelling from the Netherlands. There has been a statement from the Prime Minister of the Netherlands.
You've got it there, right?
You've got it, yeah, I've got it here. He says, I am deeply shocked by the tragic news about the crash of flight MH17 Malaysia Airlines from Amsterdam to KL over Ukrainian territory. Still very much is unclear about the facts, circumstances and the occupants. I've spoken with the Ukrainian president. I'm on my way back to the Netherlands from The Hague to monitor the situation and to continue to act. Our thought and are looking forward to the occupants, their family and their friends.
And of course, I think when people are on Twitter and they're trying to understand what's happened here, your immediate thoughts turn to the victims. And there are a collection of photographs on Twitter, which we won't show. I know we've got some of the debris of the plane. But just reflect, if you can, on what sort of thing correspondents and reporters who've made it to the crash site are seeing.
One of Twitter's strengths, but also its weaknesses, is the immediacy, because people often put stuff up there that perhaps you would not necessarily want to see. We've seen a lot of pictures of dead bodies. We're showing some on screen now. We're seeing pictures of what appears to be the crash site, lots of wreckage there, lots of smoke rising. Some of the pictures that are appearing on Twitter appear to show dead bodies. Obviously, we're not showing those. Seats that have fallen from the plane, parts of bodies. I'm looking actually now at one passport. Earlier today, there were pictures of passports that were being posted, but they seem to be getting taken down quite quickly. This appears to show a Dutch woman, that's all I'm going to say, and it is one of many that are now appearing on Twitter, more pictures of passports.
And we haven't received the passenger list. I know there are multiple nationalities on board, but we haven't received that list. And of course, I think Twitter is also useful for reflecting on the big questions that people are asking. And one of those is, why was the plane flying there, and what on earth was used to bring it down, and by who?
Yeah, and there's lots of speculation. I mean, it is now being widely reported that it was a Buk missile. Earlier today I was reading that there was a SAM missile. The actual route, we understand that this is the route that plane took whenever it made that journey from Amsterdam to KL. We understand that it was travelling at 43,000 miles, which would have been perhaps its optimum height during the flight.
Phil, we will also take a look on Twitter here. I'm just having a look. We've got some more recent pictures coming in here of the crash site. I think our correspondent Scott Heidler is very close to the crash site, and he's going to be able to tell us more. But some speculation here about what the crash site itself is going to be able to tell us in relation to this big question of who did this.
Yeah, of course, and they'll be looking for the black box as well to see what happened with this plane. There's been lots of speculation. Was it shot down? Was it an accident? I mean, the theory here is that it was shot down, but of course this is all by retweets. You know, the way things spread on Twitter is so immediate. You know, 58,000 retweets when this first broke initially. That statement from Malaysian Airlines gives you an idea of how much misinformation there is, as well as information. So you have to really filter through what you're seeing there. Lots of pictures, lots of theories. A lot of accusations as well. Anybody who has any agenda here will be making an accusation. People will be denying it, blaming each other. So you have to be very careful with what you look at. What we are looking at, there were accusations that it was shot down, that it was brought down by a Buk missile. But that is all we can really say at the moment.
And I think it's safe to say that the world is watching this developing story. We will hand you back in just a second to Doha and David Foster, who will pick up.
You are watching Al Jazeera. I am David Foster. It's 18 GMT. That is 9 p.m. in the evening in Ukraine, where a passenger jet carrying 295 people appears to have been shot down. Well, these are pictures from pretty close to the Ukrainian-Russian border, where there are reports of debris and bodies having been discovered. The international repercussions of the downing of a Malaysian Airlines jet over a war zone could be enormous.
At a time right now where you have 295 people, 295 souls that are lost, at any time that would be an international tragedy. But given the tensions between Russia and the West, this could have geopolitical implications.
James Bays, our diplomatic editor there, will be back with him in a little while. This is what we know so far. MH17, the name of the flight, a code-share flight with Dutch airline KLM, left Amsterdam Schiphol Airport at midday local time, bound for Kuala Lumpur. Malaysia Airlines says it lost contact with the Boeing 777 while it was in Ukrainian airspace. It appears to have crashed, come down in pieces perhaps, near the village of Grabovo, about 50 kilometers from Ukraine's border with Russia. Well, these are the latest pictures we've had from the scene of the debris spread over a wide area. The Ukrainian government says the aircraft was hit by a missile. The president of Ukraine says his military was not involved. And emergency services rescue workers reported as saying at least 100 bodies have been found so far. 295 passengers and crew were on board. Well, we know that the flight was only a couple of hours into its journey into the journey from Schiphol to Kuala Lumpur. As it took off from Schiphol, one of the plane spotters there, I beg your pardon, took this, what could well be the last picture of MH17 in the air. And these are pictures we are getting via Twitter of what appears to be the wreckage on the ground. I have to say what appears, it's pretty obvious that is what it is, but there has been no absolute verification of it just yet. But these pictures reaching us and other news organizations as we understand it. Pretty close to habitable areas there. MH17, 295 people on board, brought down in all likelihood, we know not by whom, but in an area where there has been intense fighting between Russia's separatists the Ukrainian authorities going on now for a number of months. The suggestion is that it was brought down by a Buk missile, an old Soviet era missile, but no confirmation of that, although I have to say that accusation was leveled by the Russian news agency Interfax, saying it was a Buk missile. Let's go to our diplomatic editor, James Bays. In London, you saw him at the top of this hour. What has been so far, James, the international reaction to this?
Well, I think slightly muted reaction at this stage, David, because I think everyone knows that this is a very significant moment in this crisis, a watershed moment, but no one is absolutely sure of the facts, and I think they want to have the facts until they make judgment, until effectively they apportion blame. Let me tell you a little bit more about that book, a missile system that you talked about, because what is significant there is this is not what they call in the military a man-pad, one of those shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles. This is a tracked vehicle with a whole missile system on the back of it. It's a very large vehicle, and it's something that will be very hard to just smuggle across a border. There only really are, if you look at this logically, and if that was what was used, three possibilities of who could have used it. One is the Russian military. Two is the Ukrainian military. They also have this system in their arsenal. Or three is separatists. And then the question comes back to Russia. Where did they get it from? And one assumes they got it somehow from Russian stocks. And I think that's why this is important. This is either going to be something that's going to be blamed on Russia directly or indirectly, or on the Ukrainians. And there are very, very big, significant repercussions depending on who is seen as responsible.
James, thanks very much indeed. We must not forget that while there are, of course, many international possibilities to the events that we've seen in Ukraine, there were 295 passengers on board this Malaysian Airlines flight. There will be families wondering what they're going to hear from the authorities. Let's go to Stephanie Scowen, who is in Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia. And what have you heard so far, not only from Malaysian Airlines, but also from the Malaysian authorities themselves?
Well, we're still waiting, actually, for the first official comment by Malaysian Airlines, or indeed the government, before the press. But we have actually just been told that the Prime Minister, Najib Razak, is here at the airport being briefed by the Chief Executive of Malaysian Airlines, and they are both going to give a press conference probably in a couple of hours, and we'll get our first indication of obviously their reaction. I know they're obviously going to be very shocked. Malaysian Airlines is obviously still coming to terms with the loss of another Boeing 777 in March. Obviously, the flight MH17 disappeared en route to Beijing, and that plane has yet to be found. So to lose a second plane within months, obviously, is going to be a big shock, not only to the airline, but the country as a whole. It's taken several months, I think, for Malaysia as a whole, as a nation, to come to terms with the loss of one plane. So the loss of two planes will really shock people in the morning when they get the news when they wake up.
Stephanie Scowen there at Kuala Lumpur Airport. Thank you very much indeed. We'll show you pictures of the reception committee awaiting the arrival in Delaware on the east coast of the United States of the US President Barack Obama. We will be back there to take the thoughts of the US President on this incident. Let's go to Rory Challens, our correspondent in Moscow, to find out what they've been saying. Rory, the first word of this came from, I think, the Ukrainian spokesman for the Ukrainian Interior Minister, but an awful lot came out from Interfax, the Russian news agency. How did it start there, and what have they been saying?
Yeah, it was Interfax that broke the news originally, and they had a source within the Ukrainian aviation authorities that they've been speaking to. We asked Interfax who that source was, and they wouldn't tell us. Of course, the more and more information has been coming out since then. That was a few hours ago now, and then the pictures started coming out on Twitter, and we started to get a more solid idea of what had happened, and we started to get some sort of Russian response as well. And we have heard that Vladimir Putin has expressed his condolences to Malaysia, and we also know that Vladimir Putin has had a conversation on the phone with Barack Obama. It was quite a long conversation, and they talked about many aspects of the conflict in East Ukraine, and they talked about the sanctions that the US has pushed against Russia. And then at the end of the conversation, they started talking about this aircraft, because it seems that it was quite fresh then, and the news was only just coming in. What Vladimir Putin said to Barack Obama was essentially what he'd been told by his own Russian aviation authorities, which was that this plane had gone down before it entered Russian airspace. The implication of that, of course, is that the Russians were saying nothing to do with us. There's also been a lot of finger pointing, a lot of blame going on the Ukrainian side of things. The Ukrainian government says that it's an act of terrorism. That was what Petro Poroshenko, the Ukrainian president, said. It wasn't an accident, it was a tragedy, and it was terrorism. He is pointing the finger at the rebels, the pro-Russian separatists in the east of the country. We've heard from them too, and they are saying nothing to do with them. They say the Donetsk People's Republic says that it does not have the type of weaponry that could have brought down a civil airliner flying at 10 kilometers up in the sky. The Donetsk People's Republic say that the only kind of weaponry that they had that could bring planes down was only effective up to about 3,000 or 4,000 meters. Now, there has been some kind of discussion going on Twitter, social media, about whether that is true or not, because some people have been pointing to pictures that seem to have been put up on the Donetsk People's Republic's social media feed a few days ago, showing a Buk missile launcher, and them saying that that is in their possession.
Rory, we're going to come back to you in a little while.
Have since disappeared.
As we can see on our screen there, the US President Barack Obama arriving to hail to the chief and about to address the crowds in Delaware.
Everybody, please have a seat. Please have a seat. It is wonderful to be back in Delaware. Before I begin, obviously the world is watching reports of a downed passenger jet near the Russia-Ukraine border. And it looks like it may be a terrible tragedy. Right now, we're working to determine whether there were American citizens on board. That is our first priority. And I've directed my national security team to stay in close contact with the Ukrainian government. The United States will offer any assistance we can to help determine what happened and why. And as a country, our thoughts and prayers are with all the families of the passengers, wherever they call home. I want to thank Jeremy for that introduction. Give Jeremy a big round of applause. It is great to be in the state that gave us Joe Biden.
Well, it appears that that is the only reference the US President is going to make to the events in eastern Ukraine, where, just to remind you, a passenger jet has fallen out of the sky. Suggestions coming from a great many different sources that it was brought down by a surface-to-air missile. It is a Malaysian Airlines plane. It had 280 passengers, 15 crew on board, no expected survivors, and debris scattered around a fairly large area in the town close to the Russian border called Grabovo. The US President saying, yes, we are aware of it, we are keeping on top of it, we will offer any assistance we can, and we are trying to find out if there were any American citizens on board. Paddy Culhane, waiting for us in Washington, D.C. What has the White House been saying about what the President plans to do, and indeed what he knows?
Well, they've been actually holding most of what they know, not commenting on anything, not confirming anything. The president making those incredibly brief statements right there. Keep in mind, it's probably for a domestic audience. I'm sure all of the cable channels took him. The networks are all going wall to wall on this. And people are starting to sound the alarm. Now, Senator John McCain has been making the rounds. Obviously, he's often quick to say that force could be used, but he's saying that if the Russians or, in fact, the separatists are involved in this, in his words, there will be hell to pay, and there should be. So the president, I think, had to come out and make a statement. One of the things that's interesting, he said, we'll do whatever we can to try and help find out exactly what happened. Now, we've been in touch with the National Transportation Safety Board. They're the ones who investigate these accidents. So far, they haven't sent a team to the area, but that is possible. But also, let's remember what we now know about U.S. capabilities. We know that the NSA has amazing capability to intercept phone calls. It's likely they've been targeting this region because of what's been happening. And we do know that the Department of Defense has their satellites up over the region because they've been giving almost daily numbers of how many Russian troops they believe are on the border. So the U.S. may have the capability to, in fact, figure out what happened here, and it may not take as long because we believe the resources are already trained on the area.
Paddy, let me just read you a couple of instances we've had, reports we've had from the news agencies. Malaysian Airlines was flying normally without problems until it disappeared from radar. That is the head of the Ukrainian airspace body. And Russia has asked Kiev on Thursday for permission to help with rescue work in eastern Ukraine, and that goes with the US president offering similar help. In practical levels, apart from looking at what they can get from their satellites, Patty, what else would you expect from perhaps the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board?
Well, obviously, the big concern is going to be, is the black box still there? Obviously, there's a question of who controls this area and whether or not they know what the black box looks like. That's the one thing that they're going to want to get, that'll tell them exactly what happened. If there's a mechanical problem, it'll be on in that black box. And obviously, it'll take a little bit of time, but that is the key that they look for. Also, we know from past crashes what the NTSB will do is they will take all of the wreckage and they will piece it together in these giant hangars, and then they'll be able to tell exactly what happened. So there are ways that they can figure out, and also if they can get to the scene, if it was in fact any sort of missile, and I don't believe that we do know that definitively, there'd be remnants of that, and anyone who wasn't an expert in explosives would possibly not be able to clean up all of the different pieces of evidence in a field of debris that is so massive, according to that picture.
Patty, you are absolutely right to point out that we do not know definitively that this was an act of terrorism, an act of aggression that brought this plane out of the sky, but I should reiterate that that is what we are hearing from all of our sources. That is what is being generally reported. And as we leave Washington, D.C. for now and go back to our diplomatic editor, James Bays, you've been hearing from different contacts of your own, James, and the general feeling, the very strong feeling, is that this was not some kind of terrible accident. It was a deliberate act.
That is certainly the way things are pointing at this time. I think it's interesting, those comments you heard from the US president, and they match what I've been told by others, which is they need first to get to the bottom of what happened. It will not take that long. There should be some sort of imagery, some sort of satellite information that the US have, but they need to get to the bottom of that first before they can make any detailed comments at all. And I think what you're going to hear now is, for a few hours, people talking about this tragedy but not apportioning blame. And then I think things are going to change very rapidly when they decide who was responsible for this. We're told by our colleagues at the United Nations that there is talk of a Security Council meeting at some point on this, whether it will take place here Thursday at the United Nations or whether it's going to take place in the coming days isn't clear at this stage. No one's called for a meeting right now, I'm told. Similarly, in Brussels, NATO, the North Atlantic Council, the ambassadors of NATO, they may well meet at some stage, but everyone is waiting for vital information at this stage, and I think there could be a moment in a few hours' time where that information is released, when things change quite significantly, David, because given the atmosphere between the West and Russia, remember, only 24 hours ago the US and the EU imposed sanctions. This is already a very tense time.
James, thanks very much indeed. We are looking at the very latest stills and moving pictures to reach us here at Al Jazeera. From the look of the collection in one place of the debris there, it appears that the aircraft came down almost vertically. Otherwise, if there'd been one enormous onboard explosion, the plane would have broken up at that. So the experts telling us that they understand that this indicates the plane was hit, was unable to fly, and quite possibly crashed on the ground, not in one piece, but after having broken up into just a few pieces. Okay, so just to wrap up for the time being, we'll come back to this story a little bit later on. 295 people believed to have died. The crater there of where the Malaysian Airline MH17 came down. Accusations flying from both sides of the Ukrainian conflict that a missile fired from the ground was responsible for the downing of this aircraft. The US and Russian presidents have spoken about it on the phone. The Ukrainian president has said this is an act of terrorism, but no confirmation as yet that this was indeed an act of aggression, although that is what many people are suggesting. And our correspondent, our diplomatic editor, James Bays, saying that at the United Nations there is talk of a UN Security Council meeting. We'll be back with our correspondents in just a little while on that developing story. Well, in other news, Gaza's facing another night of Israeli bombardment just hours after a short humanitarian pause agreed to allow aid into the territory ended. Let's go live to Nicole Johnson, who's in Gaza for us right now. We say the bombardment's continuing. Give us an idea of what people there are having to put up with.
Well, David, it is a heavy bombardment after that 5-hour lull that we had during the day. Very heavy attacks are going on in the eastern part of the Gaza Strip. In Shajaiya, there's shelling going on from tanks, and there's one particular area where there's a hospital called Wafa Hospital, and the patients there, many of them can't evacuate. They're too sick, too unwell, so they're on the bottom floor, and that area around that hospital, we've been told, is being attacked with tank shelling. At the moment, there is a doctor there and a nurse, and they're very concerned about the situation. Other areas that are under attack include the Zaytun neighborhood. All of this is in the east of Gaza, very close to the Israeli border, within 1 kilometer. Now, we have reports of 3 people killed in that eastern area from tank shelling. And this is since that truce has ended. We've also heard of 3 children being killed inside Gaza City. They were playing on the rooftop of their building with their cousins, around about 10 of them, and 3 children were killed. So a pretty heavy evening we're seeing in the Gaza Strip so far. Rockets are being fired. There are reports of more than 60 rockets. So both Israel and the Palestinian factions inside Gaza are certainly on the attack tonight.
Nicole, we'll be back with you a little bit later on. Nicole Johnson there in Gaza. One Israeli we know has been killed by a rocket fired from Gaza, although the Palestinian death toll is much, much higher. Israel strikes on Gaza have killed 237 people so far. 43 of those are children aged 17 or under. Among those children, 4 boys aged 9 to 11 who were killed by Israeli shells as they played hide and seek on the beach. Al Jazeera's Stephanie Decker saw it happen.
Mohammed's mother is inconsolable. It's hard for one of her youngest to see. He too has lost his brother. The 11-year-old boy was killed by Israeli fire on a Gaza beach along with 3 of his cousins.
Mohammed was a child, but he behaved like a man. He was a strong character. He was even looking for a job so young to help support his family. I wish God can put some patience in my heart. My heart is broken.
The attack played out in front of our eyes. I took this picture after 2 hits near a beach shack at the port. It clearly shows 4 boys running away. This is a similar moment from another angle. There was a 3rd boom I heard. And shortly after, this image seems to show a clear strike on the beach, right where the boys had run for safety. This is the immediate aftermath. One boy was pulled from the shack, and another 3 bodies were found up on the beach. It seems to those of us who witnessed this that they were directly targeted as they ran away.
This is the shack where the 2 strikes came in, where the boys were playing. We don't know what was inside the shack. We have been here for the past 10 days, and we haven't seen any rockets fired from here. There wasn't a secondary explosion when that strike came in to indicate there were any weapons stored here. So certainly very unclear what this strike was. The Israeli army says they were targeting Hamas operatives, but all we saw here were those children.
Mohammed's oldest sister raised him like a son, she says, and she wants answers.
I want to know why our children differ from the rest of the children in the world. Are they carrying guns and tanks and shooting at the soldiers? The children are playing at the sea and they kill them. Why?
They're not the first children to be killed by Israeli fire in the latest conflict, but this strike happened to be witnessed by many.
I think Israel lacks no technology to be sure about the identity of the children. So I would say that was a deliberate attack on children. It was a war crime against these children.
The Israeli army says they are continuing to investigate the incident, but the feeling here is that there will be no justice for these 4 young boys. People say no one holds Israel to account when it comes to crimes committed against the Palestinian people. Stephanie Decker, Al Jazeera, Gaza.
That was Stephanie Decker reporting there from Gaza. Now returning to our developing story, the crash in Ukraine of a Malaysian Airlines plane. 295 people on board. Accusations from both sides in the conflict there that the other side was responsible for shooting down a passenger jet. The Russian and American presidents have spoken about it. In fact, as we go to Patty Culhane live for us in Washington, D.C., we have had it confirmed, as I understand, that it was Vladimir Putin who told Barack Obama that this had happened.
Well, you know, I can tell you that they were being very vague about the timing of this, just saying that the president was briefed and that it was mentioned on the call. But now they've put out a clarification, if you can call it that, basically saying that the first public reports of the plane crash came out during the phone call and President Putin mentioned it, which seems to indicate that President Obama had no idea about what was happening until President Putin told him. We're going to try and chase them down to see if they'll actually say it specifically. But this would be another embarrassment for President Obama. Just recently, it was learned that when he was on the phone call with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, he had not been told by the CIA that an alleged U.S. spy had been arrested in Germany. She didn't bring it up, and if she had, he would have had no idea what she was talking about.
Patty, we'll leave it there for now. Patty Culhane in Washington, D.C. Let us go to Manchester in the United Kingdom, talk to Chris Yates, aviation expert, live for us there. From what you've heard so far, Chris, what do you believe happened?
It's a tragic accident, of course. Filled me with a lot of shock, horror that this sort of thing could happen to a civil airliner in flight across the country. You know, when we think about aircraft flying, they're flying very high. The likelihood of something like a shoulder-held missile being able to strike at an aircraft such as this, very remote indeed. So if we are talking about a missile strike, it has to be something much more powerful, much more potent. It has to be a medium long-range missile, something that would have the legs to reach up and tragically take out a civil airliner such as this.
Well, Chris, we're looking at on our screens to the right of where you are at the moment, what I understand to be the Buk system, Soviet-era missile system, which has been mentioned a number of times, principally by the Russians, in regard to this. What do you know about that? It comes on a truck rather than being shoulder-held. Is it pretty sophisticated? Could it get that high?
Potentially quite sophisticated, of course, and yes, could most certainly get that high. That is, of course, presuming that this type of weapon was freely in use in the Donetsk region of that part of the world. You know, we have to have proof yet that technology
was available to the insurgents. But until that proof comes, we can't positively say that it will be such a device.
If it were to be something like this, some kind of ground-to-air device that brought down this plane, would there have been an enormous explosion and the plane bursting into a lot of pieces up higher, or would it, as some people have said, if it had just been a heat seeker onto an engine, have disabled the plane and the plane would then have crashed and broken up either shortly before hitting the ground or upon impact?
Well, precisely. If it were a missile with a heat-seeking head on it, the heat seeker would have gone straight for an engine, the engines of course being very hot, and it would have taken the engine off the wing, probably also demolished the wing structure, I would have thought, and therefore the aircraft comes down straight away.
Chris, just tell us a little bit about why some airlines had decided not to fly across this area where there is a war going on, and some airlines had decided that it was a risk worth taking. Were you surprised to know that some people were still doing it?
Surprised indeed, because at the end of the day, it's probably less than wise to operate a civil airliner in commercial service anywhere where there is a conflict zone. Of course, the conflict has been getting worse over recent days after a period of quiet, so that may well have lulled civil airliners into a false sense of security. But just talking about the routes that airlines take, this is the shortest distance between Amsterdam and Kuala Lumpur. It's a great circle route which takes aircraft directly across this part of the world. And for that reason, the airlines would have normally operated unless they were told by the various safety authorities to avoid that area. And none of the information coming out of the Ukraine has alerted the safety authorities to any potential danger to civil aircraft.
Yeah, indeed. This is from the head of Ukrainian airspace, the regulatory body. The plane was flying normally without problems until it simply disappeared from the radar. How is it going to be possible to find out what caused this? Presumably it might be a little easier since the debris is in a concentrated area than it might be if there was an onboard explosion. But is it simply down to finding the black box, or are there other means of discovering what went wrong?
Well, it is the black box, of course, that everybody talks about. Two black boxes, the flight voice recorder and the flight data recorder. Both of these devices will yield up a huge amount of information. If we're talking about, for example, a missile strike, then it's probable that the voice recorder would have heard and recorded for a few seconds and the sound of the explosion as it happened. And obviously the data recorder records a massive number of parameters for the airframe, and that would also have will indicate precisely what happened. So an awful lot of information to go on. Fortunate, if you can call this fortunate, that the wreckage contained in a relatively close area, and therefore the potential is quite clearly good for those two devices to be retrieved.
Chris, thank you very much indeed. Chris Yates there, talking about the intricacies of the operation to discover what may have gone wrong on board that plane. Now, just a warning, this is obviously an extremely disturbing story anyway. We've seen the debris on the ground, we've seen the plane just after takeoff, but we now have, as far as I understand it, some pictures of the last moments of this aircraft in the distance. As suggested by Chris Yates and others, the plane did not break up in mid-air. It looks as though there was a massive explosion as it hit the ground, which would perhaps indicate that one of the engines was disabled by a missile, as has been suggested. Well, let's go through some of the main points at this time. It is 18:30 GMT. That is 9:30 p.m. in Ukraine, where a passenger jet carrying 295 people appears to have been shot down. This is what we know for sure. MH17, a code-share flight with the Dutch airline KLM, left Amsterdam Schiphol Airport at midday local time, destined for Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia. Malaysia Airlines says it lost contact with the Boeing 777 while it was in Ukrainian airspace, that it disappeared off the radar. It crashed near the village of Grabovo, which is about 50 kilometers from Ukraine's border with Russia. Well, the Ukrainian government says it was hit by a missile, the aircraft. The president saying his military, involved in a battle with pro-Russia separatists, was not involved. And emergency services rescue workers reported as saying that at least 100 bodies have been found so far. There were 295 people, that is crew and passengers, on board MH17. Well, the incident generating a huge response on social media as well as between international leaders. Julia MacDonald in our European News Centre in London, take us through what you've been able to discover.
Thanks very much, David. Well, of course, people all over the world, just like us, are understandably desperate to find out what's happened, and they're sharing a lot of information online. I've been following these feeds along with my colleague who joins me in the studio, Phil Lavelle. Hi there, Phil. Let's talk first of all about the airlines. They've been making some statements on Twitter, haven't they?
They are. They're gradually starting to respond to what's happened. We're going to start first of all with Malaysian Airlines, the airline that owned this plane. Their response, which was posted on Facebook, says Malaysia Airlines confirms it received notification from Ukrainian air traffic control that it had lost contact with flight MH17 at 14:15 GMT, 30 kilometers from Tamak waypoint, approximately 50 kilometers from the Russia-Ukraine border. Flight MH17 operated on a Boeing 747, departed Amsterdam 12:15 p.m. Amsterdam local time, was estimated to arrive at Kuala Lumpur International Airport 6:10 a.m. Malaysia the next day. The flight was carrying 280 passengers and 50 crew on board. The other airlines are starting to respond now. We've seen Air France saying that it has decided it will not fly over eastern Ukraine in the wake of the loss of this flight. It had already stopped flying over the Crimea region on the 3rd of April following uncertainty over safety of airspace in the wake of political unrest. KLM, the Dutch airline, has also responded. It's actually given us a statement. The statement reads, although yet not officially confirmed by Malaysia Airlines, which is obviously slightly out of date now, it is with great regret that KLM has learned about the possible incident with flight MH17, codeshare KL4103 of Malaysia Airlines from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur. We are in contact with Malaysia Airlines to obtain further information. There's a little bit more, which doesn't really say much else. British Airways have put its flights to Kiev under review. Turkish Airlines and Aeroflot also avoiding the area.
Let's talk about the reflection that there's been on Twitter about these statements and the behaviour in some instances of politicians. A lot of tweeting about Barack Obama when he made a statement this afternoon which people thought was far too jovial. Yeah,
I mean, he was at an event, I believe, in Delaware, and he sort of spruced up to the stage, then went into a very sort of somber pose to talk about what had happened, and then kind of carried on with the way he'd been before. A lot of slight unease about the way he seemed to respond there. The State Department, even Barack Obama's official Twitter account, are not mentioning this yet at all. You know, we have seen that statement on television. We've seen nothing on Twitter. We've heard from David Cameron, the British Prime Minister. He released a statement not long ago on his Twitter account in which he said, I am shocked and saddened by the Malaysian air disaster. Officials from across Whitehall, for viewers who aren't aware, is the sort of political area in the centre of London, are meeting to establish the facts. Vladimir Putin has commented. Vladimir Putin has discussed the situation in Ukraine with US President Barack Obama, is what his official Twitter account said, followed by condolences to Malaysian Prime Minister in connection with the crash of a passenger aircraft in Ukraine.
And what we've yet been able to do, Phil, and I'm guessing over the hours and the days that come, is to put a human face to this, because of course there are all these victims, 295 of them. In some instances, there are pictures, of course, which we are not showing on Twitter, but it's starting to build a picture of the people who've lost their lives.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen faces of people we believe who lost their lives, faces from passports. Now, obviously, Twitter, one of its strengths is the immediacy. Things just get thrown on there. Sometimes you can't verify them, but the impression is that these are photographs of passports that seem to have somehow survived this crash. Pictures of people who may have been on board. We don't have the passenger list yet. We're not going to give any names, but I looked at one photograph which appears to be a middle-aged Dutch woman, and the passport appeared to be photographed near that site. Looking at some of the pictures here as well, these are a lot of images are coming through on Twitter. Some of them we're not showing, some we are. The more graphic ones, obviously, we're not showing, but there is lots of stuff here of the wreckage, lots of stuff of some of the bodies. Again, we're not going to show too much information here.
And of course, David's earlier guest was saying that those pictures that we're seeing will hopefully help the investigation because the crash site is quite concentrated.
Yes, exactly. And also, you know, this claim that the black box has been retrieved. There is video here, and again, this is the problem with Twitter. You can't always verify because people with agendas will push their things at the earliest opportunity. There is what looks like pictures of a Buk missile launcher being moved through the streets somewhere. It may have been today. It says here that it was today. Whether or not it was today, we don't know. But it lends credence to what Chris Yates was just saying in Manchester just a moment ago about the fact that this was probably not launched from the shoulder, but from a grounded missile.
And also something just popped up on Twitter about Britain calling for a meeting at the UN. Now that shows that we're moving in a direction away from caution on the international stage to looking at this more intently and saying, what's the next step?
Yeah, and a lot of people in politics will be considering their responses. You know, the thing about Twitter is people put loads of information on. People probably put information on too soon. But politicians are very careful about what they write. You tend to hear a lot of them when there's an election coming up, for example. But people will be considering their responses.
Phil, we'll leave it there just now. We'll head back now to David Foster in Doha.
Yeah, Julie, thanks very much indeed. Yeah, what happens on Twitter often turns out to be not what has happened in reality. We must caution against that, but we do have a man who knows and has the right phone numbers to dial to discover what is happening at the United Nations, and that's our diplomatic editor, James Bates.
And we can confirm that information on Twitter because we have learnt in the last few moments that the British delegation at the United Nations, one of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations, has called for a UN Security Council meeting on what has happened in eastern Ukraine, on the crash of this plane. Not clear when that meeting will take place. It's up to the presidency. It's a monthly rotating presidency currently held by Rwanda to schedule that meeting, but I'm sure there'll be countries, including the UK, that want that meeting to happen as soon as possible. So I suspect it is likely in the next 24 hours. There had been talk at the UN for a meeting on Ukraine anyway, given the developments in the last 24 hours and those new sanctions. So that's the news out of New York in the last few minutes. News out of Brussels too, and we have a statement. We've had a lot of statement from world leaders, as you expect, shocked by this tragedy, shocked by what looks like this very large death toll. This is the first statement to come out of one of the capitals with further details, taking it further. Let me just read this bit, David. The circumstances must be clarified without delay, and the international investigation must shed full light on this tragedy. And then the important bit, I think, here. We call on all parties in the region of the crash to provide full access to the crash site so it can be secured immediately, to cooperate fully and to share all relevant information. Now, why is that paragraph in there? Well, we're getting reports from the scene, or close to the scene, that certainly journalists operating in the area are not being allowed free movement, free access to the area. Separatists are preventing their movement. We're also hearing, and I have to stress the source of this because it's a Russian news agency, Interfax, but Interfax are saying and claiming that a group of separatists have got the black box, have removed the black box, and now have custody of the black box. If that's true, and I stress we only have it from one Russian news agency, that is an important development.
Yeah, well, James, you'd have to wonder why the Russian news agency would want to report that if it actually were a fact, when it is pro-Russia separatists who they are suggesting actually did this. We don't know for sure. You're right to caution against taking that too seriously, but it would be a serious development if it were the case. We do know that our team on the ground in Ukraine have had difficulty getting to this particular site. So once again, James, Britain calling for an emergency meeting. Will that happen within the next few hours, or could that take a little bit of time? Because, as you say, there are diplomatic wheels that have to start turning.
And there are certainly some countries that will want more information, perhaps, before having such a meeting. As these things tend to happen at the UN Security Council, yes, as I say, you have a president, Rwanda, but the real power is held by the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. One of those has called for the meeting, but watch closely what the other 4 do, and those other 4, of course, include Russia, intimately involved in the crisis in Ukraine, and also the US. And it's clear from what we heard at the beginning of the hour from the US President that they are still checking things. They are going to make that comment, which of course you'd expect in an appalling tragedy like this. President Obama saying how shocked he is by the death toll, but not going any further about apportioning blame. They're waiting, trying to gather more information as we speak.
James, thanks very much indeed, which leads us very nicely to Rory Challens, our correspondent in Moscow. Interfax saying or suggesting that pro-Russia separatists may well have gone off with the black box. From what you know about Interfax and from what they've said so far, is this at all to be trusted, this source?
Yes, I think it is, and I think if Interfax say that the separatists have the black box, then that's probably the case. And the Russian news agencies tend to have fairly good contacts with the separatists in the east of Ukraine. So, I mean, we don't have independent verification of that yet, but I would argue that's probably